Hi, everybody. Welcome to Leading for Life Stories, Season 2. My name is Bob Judson, and I'm your host for this podcast, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you here joining me. Thanks very much, and I really hope you enjoy what follows. My guest this week is Professor Michael Mainelli. Michael is the current Lord Mayor of London, so it was an enormous privilege to have an opportunity to record a podcast with him. He has the most amazing, diverse CV with a whole range of executive and non-executive employment across a wide range of sectors. And unsurprisingly, therefore, has got a fascinating perspective on an awful lot of things. We talk a lot about the city and what the City of London Corporation is all about, what the Lord Mayor's role is all about, how he came to be in that position, and also what he's learned along the way in terms of his own leadership style. We also have a very strong connection to Christ Hospital, my old school, where Michael was an almoner for a lengthy period of time. And he has a very fond attachment to the school, and he talked very much about that as well. And that's related to his role as Lord Mayor, because one of the things the Lord Mayor of London does every year is actually attends Speech Day at Christ Hospital in the summer term. And the school band also marches on the Lord Mayor's parade, which takes place in the autumn in London every year. So there is a really tight connection, which I think made that particularly special for Michael with his tenure as Lord Mayor. As I say, an amazing opportunity to talk to someone who's in the midst of an incredibly busy schedule and a very demanding job, but with such an interesting set of perspectives. It's a great conversation. I really hope you find it as interesting as I did. And here we go. Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. What a privilege to have the Lord Mayor of London in your term of office, which I know how busy you must be. I feel very privileged and very fortunate to have you. Thank you very much.
Well, it's great to be here, Bob, and it's nice to participate in a series of podcasts that are really focused on what we need to think about in terms of leadership. So let's get cracking.
Super. Thank you very much indeed. I mean, you've had a fascinating career journey. I mean, one look at your CV shows that, private sector, public sector, aldermanic journey, all those different things. Just to get us started, could you kind of give a bit of a synopsis of your career journey to date?
Yeah, sure. Well, I started working at a tender age in research, in defense research. And I've always seen myself very much as a research scientist. So I spent effectively 10 years doing that. And then I found myself working in the city and realized I didn't know a lot about finance. And so I basically requalified, taking an accountancy qualification and also securities trading qualification alongside all the work that I had been doing in both aerospace research and cartography. So probably my technical claim to fame in the late 70s and early 80s were the first digital maps of the world. Those were the first commercial digital maps about 20 years before Google Earth. I'm very jealous of Google Earth. It's a wonderful tool. But then within the city, I rose to become a partner leading the BDO consulting work internationally. And that was really my life, was bouncing between the two. And then in the mid-90s, the Ministry of Defense said, hey, we need somebody who understands accountancy, finance, et cetera, but also understands science. And I became a director of the Defense Evaluation Research Agency, which was then the largest R&D organization in Europe. And I had a wonderful time there as well. So I've always summarized my career as a research scientist, and my job has always been to try and find interesting problems and see if there's something I can do about it. Sometime in the late 80s, I discovered the city, and we can come on to that perhaps in its own way. And that meant that I became interested in the wards, later into delivery companies, and then decided to stand for election as an alderman in 2013, 11 years ago. And that led to the Lord Mayor, which is a single year post, but we can come on to that, as I say. And these days I chair a wonderful organization called ZYEN, ZYEN. ZYEN is now 30 years old, come next month. And I style it as the City of London's leading commercial think tank. We're a small group, about 25 people. We go out and try and find problems to solve. We'll probably come on to some of those. And they tend to be surprisingly where science and technology meet economics and finance. In other words, it's a bit of a lifestyle firm. but it's a wonderful group to work with.
Well, yeah, as I said, a fascinating career. What a journey! And that digital mapping thing, I think I'd always marvel at the pace of technology over our lifetimes. I mean, it was a similar sort of age, I think. And you look at what has changed. I mean, Google Earth is a great example of that, isn't it? And just the fact that we can go right down to Street View and those sorts of things, quite extraordinary, really, with technology these days. And and as you say, having dealt a lot with DERA along the way in terms of the defense side from my own time in the MOD, bringing together genuine financial and accounting expertise into any public sector, actually, but particularly the Ministry of Defence. I suspect you added a huge amount of value in the time you were there, for sure.
Oh, well, I mean, one of the funny things about the MOD, particularly in those days, is that they were based on cash accounting. And sounds like a technical accounting thing, but they're very much a cash-based area. They didn't want to move to accruals accounting, which means putting down your assets and liabilities over the longer term. And they refused to call it accruals accounting, so they called it resource accounting. And I was there as we took 50 Ministry of Defense agencies from this cash accounting basis onto accruals accounting, and the cultural shift was just enormous. You had people sort of saying, well, I'm a very important person, so I need a huge balance sheet. My balance sheet, because I've got huge tracts of land, is worth several billion, like 10 billion. I go, well, that's great. So let's depreciate that at sort of 5%. And where are you going to find 500 million every year? 500 million every year? I can't find that. Well, that's the implications of it. So the naivety in that space was enormous. We made progress, but I still think there's a tremendous amount of work to do. As anybody who looks at the state of public finances around the world would admit, we have not quite grasped the nettle of getting public finance accounting done in a correct manner that helps us make the right sorts of decisions.
Yeah, it's really interesting. When I left the Air Force at the end of my kind of almost 35 years and went to Deloitte, one of the things in that sort of transition journey for anybody coming out of the MOD, whether they're uniform or civil servants, I think, are moving into the private sector, is this. I'd managed some big budgets and I'd been part of organizations which had big budgets, but they were not profit and loss. It was not, your sole objective really as a budget holder was to make sure you didn't overspend your budget. And that the level of misunderstanding, I think, with people stepping out from my old world into the private sector is definitely there. I mean, learning how to be more commercial, how to work in a P&L, and genuinely understand some of that accounting mystique is a really valuable thing to do. I mean, the system has got much better about equipping people for exactly that kind of transition. But as you say, it's a journey that I don't think is anywhere near complete yet.
Yeah, I sometimes feel you're in danger of becoming kind of a grumpy old man. There's Amara's law. Roy Amara coined this. I think back in the 70s. Was that we tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run and underestimate the effect in the long run. And it's become quite a popular expression these days to talk about. And so if you look at mapping, you'd say, well, nobody quite understood the huge change that would make. I mean, just the sheer scale of mapping really in the 70s and 80s was outrageous. You had thousands of people in London just working on exploration maps for the oil industry, which was the area that we managed to get the most value out of. But I think that same application of technology applies to things like techniques like accounting. It includes ways of thinking. And I think as you get older, you begin to realize some of these very minor things that you thought were really exciting and have now discarded actually did embed and have made big differences over decades. But it's that bit about underestimating in the long term.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I totally agree. I always like to talk about early motivations, just because I think it's really interesting to see how people got started, what kind of floated their boat, as it were, to move them into a particular career. How was that for you? And given you've had such a kind of diverse career, how did you sort of shift it, and how did things develop from there?
Well, I'm not too sure how much it is, in fact, your internal motivation. It's basically nurture versus nature. Is it the environment that makes you, or do you make the environment? I will say that the environment that I was living in was a highly mobile one. Dad was Italian, mom's Irish, born in the States, but I started school in Italy. And then we moved back to America because Dad was very excited about technology as an engineer. In fact, my grandfather's also an engineer, or both of them, in fact. We come from quite a science and technical family. And we also come from one that likes to move a lot and is really quite hyper international. So I was always wide eyed and open to things. I think it had little choice. I think the second thing was just pure curiosity. If there's anything that's driven me, it's just been curiosity. I'm always curious how things work. Now, is that a science or an engineering type of approach? But show me something, and I'm always interested in how it functions. How would I take it apart? If I took it apart, could I get back together again? Always. I probably have two rules I always tell my children: before you take something apart, have you worked out how you're going to get back together again? And anytime you get into any kind of vehicle, the first question is, how do I stop it? Not how do I start it?
Yeah.
Those are kind of the two big problem areas in life. But innate curiosity definitely drove me. And I think probably combined with that, a little bit of intellectual fearlessness. I'm not saying there aren't things I can't understand. And I'm sure if you spoke to people about my emotional quotient, they might say he doesn't get a few things, definitely. But in truth, you have to kind of say, surely I must be able to understand most things if I put my mind to it. And I guess those are things that motivated me. And that drives you down a route of problem solving. Because when you see something, you kind of go, how does it work? How can I make it work better? Oh, there's a problem here. What could I do about it?
Again, that makes absolute sense, and that's I think that curiosity thing is obviously what's taking you on such a diverse journey across the way. So that really fits. But you are now the 695th Lord Mayor of London. I mean, that's a hell of a number and a hell of a statistic. Before we go into some of the specific aspects of the role, because I really do think there's lots of stuff that would be useful to talk about from your personal experience of it and the kind of leadership dynamic in there. I suspect quite a lot of the listeners to this podcast will not be that familiar or with the city and the City of London Corporation and all of that. Could you just illuminate some of that for us, just so that there's some context there?
Yeah, but Bob, I'd be delighted. I'm finding this year a lot of my work is just explaining the city, and I've put a bit of a novel spin on it, to be fair. When you look at the City of London Corporation, which we're talking about, we are technically styled as the governing body of the square mile on the website. That doesn't really tell you very much, because you might think, well, we're a local authority and we have local authority powers. I'll come on to that in a minute. You might say we're sort of an historical anomaly, and you might say, why do I care about 1.12 square miles of London, and what's that got to do with the City of London? So oddly, you have to love history to be Lord Mayor. So let's try and unpack this a little bit. A definition of the city that I have been promoting quite assertively this year has been that we are the world's oldest continuous democratic workers and residents cooperative. And I think that that's worth unpacking. World's oldest, difficult to say when we were founded, but we believe we've been holding continuous elections since the middle of the 7th century. I'll come on to that. And we've been holding those elections, as I say, throughout now nearly 14 centuries. The second thing is, workers and residents? Yes. And what is interesting is workers have the vote in the city. So do residents. Now, this was a model that was very, very common across Europe. Arguably, 250 or so of the cities across Europe ran in this fashion, that the workers were assembled in guilds and they had the vote as guild members. And it wasn't just London that worked like this. A few cities in England did. York for a while, Bristol. Not as many. We'll come back to that in a minute. Throughout the Hanseatic League, this was a very, very strong format through most of the Holy Roman Empire. The areas where it didn't quite work were the highly centralized nations, in particular Spain and France. They were not really run this way, but northern Italian cities very much run by the guilds. And this was all sort of shut down in 1800 by Napoleon, but we forget it. We live in the last 2 centuries in the nation-state period, and so everybody sort of says, "Well, who gives you authority to do this?" And you kind of go, "Well, we do. We own the square mile, and therefore we try and make decisions as a workers' cooperative with residents involved." Ultimately, just to follow that through historically, the Lord Mayor is a bit of a new position. We're still trying to figure out quite what the Lord Mayor does. In truth, the oldest roles in the city are the sheriffs. Those were the first elections in 650. We then began having aldermen for each of the 25 wards in the city, These 25 wards are, again, nearly 14 centuries old. And I am the alderman for Broad Street Ward. That's the Lord Mayor is just one of the 25 aldermen for that year, primus inter pares. The Aldermanic Council began sometime in the 8th or the 9th century. In the 9th or the 10th century, we had the Court of Common Council. May sound familiar to British listeners because, in fact, this was the model that 200-300 years later became the basis of Parliament. Common Council effectively becoming the House of Commons, and the Court of Aldermen or Barons, as it was also referred to, becoming the House of Lords. So at the time, in 1066, when William I arrives, he does not conquer the city. And again, perceptive listeners will say, why didn't he say William the Conqueror? Never conquered the city. So we negotiated a treaty with William in 1067. We have three more substantial treaties with the Crown, 1132, 1189, and 1215, which listeners might know as the Magna Carta. So we've always been this independent unit. And if you then turn to economics, the City of London is, in Georgist terms, this is the Georgist economic terms, we're what's called land value capture. So we own the land, and the way that we raise our money is to make that land more valuable so that we can tax it. We spend those taxes on improving the physical environment and the business environment. That creates prosperity, and that prosperity is then spent on charity. So I always say the city is about three things: commerce, community, and charity. And even today, here we are in 2024, and the Lord Mayor is elected by the guilds. The sheriffs are elected by the guilds. The aldermen and the common councillors are elected by the voters and the residents, and the system really functions in a really good way. And I would point out, a lot of listeners say, well, that's not modern governance. And I keep sort of wondering sometimes, but what has modern governance ever actually done for the world? There's actually quite a bit you can learn from the governance structures of very old institutions. And we are up there with the Vatican amongst one of the very oldest of the institutions. We have a tremendous number of checks and balances in a very complex system, I'll grant you. But it is a fun system to learn. It's a fun system to lead. And as I point out, we have 615,000 workers in the city, about 8,000 residents. And when you look at the fact that those workers have the vote, remember that we are about 2% of the national workforce, generating arguably just under 10% of GDP. So it's a very hyper productive area. And it's not just finance. We have about a third of our workforce is in finance, both banking and insurance, along with some professions like the actuarial, which are pretty much wholly financial. But one third of our workforce, 200,000, is actually in, believe it or not, science, engineering, and technology. Another third of our workforce is in education, media, arts, entertainment, and believe it or not, shipping. We remain the largest shipping thing. So if you take our 615,000, we've got 45,000 insurers, 55,000 bankers, getting to 100,000, another 100,000 for finance. We have 200,000 in science, engineering, and tech. And we have, as I say, about another 200,000 in the remaining areas of education through to shipping. Now, just to conclude with that kind of statistical dump, what it means is that the city is often not what people outside look at. It's become a bit of a shorthand for British finance, but in truth, most of our finance is not British, it's international. And so one third is handling the international. Second thing is we're not necessarily large firms. There are 24,000 businesses in the city of London. The 23,750 qualify as SMEs.
Wow.
So I talk about the science, engineering, and tech being a third of it. That's 8,000 of our businesses are science, engineering, and tech. And then another thing we get is this kind of, well, you're okay, but you're not famous. Oxford and Cambridge are far bigger intellectually. There I'd even disagree. We have 40 learned societies, 70 universities, don't forget the overseas ones, and 130 research institutes within 2 miles of the Guildhall. So I'm not going out to Oxford or Cambridge for this. And in fact, if you look at, say, the Smart Centers Index, which my firm Zen compiles, the Smart Centers Index places London way up there ahead of Oxford and Cambridge and every other center in the world. In fact, way above Oxford and Cambridge combined. I mean, UCL, which is ranked at, I think, number 5th or 6th in the world rankings against Oxford or Cambridge at 3 or 4 or whatever, is actually the size of Oxford and Cambridge combined. So we have an enormous powerhouse here. And I think a lot of that goes back to the fact that it is, in fact, a workers and residents cooperative.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. Wow. I mean, you're not kidding about knowing history to do that. That's extraordinary. And I mean, interestingly, on the finance piece, I mean, I remember around the time of the whole Brexit debate and the kind of aftermath of the EU exit vote, there was a lot of discussion about the city and the loss of the city to the UK. And I'll be interested to get your perspective on where that sits now, I suppose, given that obviously some stuff has gone offshore. There are clearly, I work quite a lot overseas, and there are definitely some differences and some challenges associated with that. But what's the perspective from your seat?
Well, one of the things that you do get is you get a very historical perspective sitting in the seat. So, yeah, I'm the 695th Lord Mayor over the 835 years we've had Lord Mayors since it was first formed in 1189 by Henry Fitzalan. Then the fact I rattle these things off shows you how important understanding that trajectory is. We've been here before. Arguably, one of our biggest mistakes was, well, definitely a big mistake, was throwing out the Jews under King John. And in fact, what we had to do then was we had to attract back in people to handle finance. And as I point out, we renamed one of the best streets in the city, Lombard Street, exactly that, Lombard Street, Lombardia, to attract the Italians, my forebears back in to actually operate in money lending and money exchange. So we've been there. We were there as well, don't forget, in 1999 with the euro, because Britain wasn't participating in the euro. That was going to be a disaster for the city. Now, it has not been a disaster for the city staying out of the euro, and Brexit has not been a disaster. Could things be better if it hadn't happened? That's another one of those what ifs. And I think people will argue it both ways. But I might leave you with two very hard facts about Brexit. I gave you a figure there of 615,000 workers in 2024. But when we had the Brexit vote in 2016, 8 years ago, it was 525,000. So we've actually increased our workforce by 90,000. The second thing is that what I like to look at is global assets under management. It's a hard figure to get, but again, there we rose from, we believe, about 11% of global assets under management. Remember, that's being managed by Britain. That's 1% of the world's population is managing 11%. Well, actually, that went up to 13%. And believe me, 2% of global assets under management is a very big number.
Yeah.
We're looking at the city doing well. Could it have done better? Maybe. And that's, what a Remainer would say. And I probably fall into the Remain camp still. But these things are almost immaterial now.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, I nailing my own colours to the mast. I was firmly in the Remain camp, but it is what it is, and we elected to leave, and we've got to live with it and deal with the with that and move forward positively. And that's a really positive story. That's amazing. I didn't know that. Coming back to your specific role as Lord Mayor and just the journey to get there, given the history around this and all the rest of it, I'll be fascinated in your move from kind of through the being an alderman ultimately to then becoming a Lord Mayor and how that process works.
Well, again, we come back to sort of commerce, community, and charity. So if you work in the city and you've got your eyes open, you're like, hey, this place is functioning better than many, many other bits of the world. Why is that? How is it governed, et cetera? So curiosity gets you there. The second thing is within the community, there are a number of ways to participate. And I would point out three. One is to do genuine work with the corporation itself. And I began working with the corporation in the late 80s, particularly on environmental issues, including the creation of the carbon markets. Second thing is that within the community, there are ward clubs. Each ward has its own ward club, typically a few hundred people, but it allows you to meet the neighbors. And as I always point out, London is the most intense commuter spot on the planet. Remember, we drop those 615,000 workers every day on 1 square mile. Then they go home. There's nothing as intense as that. New Yorkers there will be saying, well, we're like, no, Manhattan, about 350,000 moving every day and spread across 6 to 8 square miles. This is the intensity. Tokyo, very intense, but everybody's moving to different places. There's no core. So that intensity means you have two communities, your work community and, the PTA or the golf club or the scouts that you have when you're back out in Surrey or Hertfordshire. And I keep trying to encourage people to engage with that city community through the ward clubs, which are very easy to join. And then we have the livery cubs, the guilds that I mentioned. The livery companies are about 111 of them, and they span all sorts of industries and sectors. We have world traders, accountants, lawyers, blacksmiths, etc. It's a very, very rich mixture. There are about 50,000 people in the livery movement, so about just under 10% of the city population is involved in the livery movement. And I would encourage listeners who are interested in joining to explore both joining a war club and joining the livery, or even running for office within the corporation. In my particular case, I had become chairman of Broad Street War Club and therefore very involved. And people said, well, why don't you stand for alderman in 2013? So I did, and I won that election. And I was very pleased to represent Broad Street. And then a few years later, my fellow alderman suggested that maybe I might like to consider running for sheriff. The role of sheriff is an interesting one, actually older than the mayoralty, and we could play some funny games. Technically responsible for tax, which is vestigial, and responsible for defense of the city, which is vestigial, but still there. But most importantly, responsible for the central criminal courts. And normally that's a chairman type role. You find it easy to be chairman for a year. In my case, of course, we had COVID, so there were major changes to the courts, and we were asked to stay on for an additional year. So my brother sheriff and I, Chris Hayward, were the first double aldermanic sheriff since 1228 AD.
Wow.
We actually served for 2 years. And then, having done a job as sheriff, that's a little bit of a proving ground. People suggested that I might like to be Lord Mayor, but what would I like to do with it? And so I laid out a stall a few years ago, something called Connect to Prosper, trying to celebrate the many knowledge miles that I elucidated in the square mile, and emphasizing this ability of London. And I guess this goes back to my motivation about curiosity, that if I am sitting in Jakarta or Sao Paulo or something, I don't care about all those numbers this Lord Mayor touted. What can the City of London do for me? And what the City of London can do for you is to help solve global problems. So this year, Connect to Prosper has looked at all 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals and about another 8 issues that bother me, ranging from quantum encryption to AI to space debris. So we've had a very rich year of showing how the city can contribute to solving global problems. And I think that's, to me, a meld of the personal with the opportunities in the post. I think one of the things that's weird about the post is people go, what sort of power do you have? Well, I come up with nearly 90 things that I'm Admiral of the Port of London. I'm in charge of the police. I'm the chief magistrate of the city. If I could do all those things at once, that'd be pretty amazing, but I can't. So they are all there. I'm rector of City University this year. And we're there. But what you're doing is you're actually trying to see and lead the commercial side to look at new areas. So I've been looking at how we regulate AI. What are we going to do about space debris? What are we going to do about the hydrogen markets? What are we going to do about quantum resistant encryption? So you're trying to help the commercial sector move forward. That's probably about 2/3 of the job. Then the other third of the job is split between trying to keep the community together, taking all of those vestigial positions, but going around and making sure everybody's happy and connected, hence the Connect to Prosper. And then very finally, there's a tremendous amount of philanthropic and charity work supporting causes. This year in particular, mental health, but there are about another 25 causes ranging from London Air Ambulance to the Royal Humane Society to the apprenticeship schemes that I'm also trying to assist with. So a lot going on there. And your power as such is really mostly just identifying things that you can convene people about. So I lay out a kind of a 7-part process, but the particular that I focus on is convening power. You as Lord Mayor can identify something and say, I'd like to convene people on that. And so this year I've been doing things like convening people on our engagement with the Thames and cleaning the Thames. We had a bicycle awareness day where we, not just awareness, this wasn't training. We actually had 80 police officers fining people for violating traffic laws, which wasn't difficult. I think in under an hour, we'd already handed out 80 fixed fines. So, because it's something that bothers me, but it's also something that bothers the population. So when I lay out my bit, I say, actually, the strategic skill of a Lord Mayor is identifying the thing that you want to convene about. That's the brain powery bit. What is it going to be? Once you've done that, you convene people. That's not hard. That's your power base. You invite them to Mansion House and they turn up for breakfast to discuss anti-fraud, which is something I did recently, or next week we'll be talking about the future of payments or science and technology. Very easy to convene people. But then you want to get them to contribute something. You want consensus. You want commitment to doing something. Then you want them to communicate it, right? Which I see as really there. So to me, it's this kind of contribution, consensus, commitment, communication. And the final bit is celebrate. And that was something I didn't appreciate until I started moving up the Shrivel mayoralty bit. Handing those awards out, telling people they've done a good job, that encourages them to feel good about themselves and want to do more and engage others to do more is actually part of the job. So I'll just repeat that. Identify, convene, get a contribution, get some consensus, get some commitment, communicate it, and celebrate it. And that's how I feel.
Fascinating. I love the celebrate bit. I often talk in the work I do these days about, thank you being two words that are, the least used in the English language, particularly together at the same time, because I think it's such a small thing that means so much to so many people. And we don't do it enough. So I totally agree. I think, awards, recognition, and just thanking people makes an enormous difference. I'm conscious as well with everything you've just said, and you said it earlier on, you have a 1 year term of office. I mean, that's a hell of a lot to pack into 1 year. And obviously you may come with a sort of different set of priorities to your predecessor, and your successor may, again, have a completely different set of priorities. What kind of coordination and sort of longer term strategic structure do you have, if any, that tries to make it a genuine progress thing? Because one of the reason I say that is one of my concerns about UK politics, and it's not just UK politics, is that there is very little strategic horizon in most of our parliamentary system at the minute. A lot of our politicians are focused now, having been elected in July, they're now focused on 5 years' time and getting re-elected. So the window is progressively closing in terms of actually doing stuff, because they're increasingly focused on just making sure that they stay in power, as opposed to having anything that's cross-party consensus that's longer-term objective. I mean, how does that work for the city?
Well, I'm going to be a big promoter of this. It's a question that comes up a lot, and I can see for good reason. And I think it's incumbent on me to explain a couple of key differences in the role. The first thing is you don't just start on the 10th of November, as I did, and run through and kind of make it up on the fly. So I had actually taken a year and a half off beforehand. And I would hasten to add that these roles are unpaid. So I've spent 2 years unpaid as sheriff. And it will be 2.5 years unpaid, preparing for Lord Mayor and being Lord Mayor. And I can only do so thanks to the commitment that my firm, Zien, has to the city. And many other Lord Mayors have experienced the fact that their firms still feel it is an important bit of public service to put senior people out there, seconded effectively for free to do these roles. So I'd leave it at that. So it's not like I just kind of made it up in 12 months. Mm-hmm. The second thing is there's an informal commitment that you'll stand for election again. Aldermanic terms are 6 years, and spend another 6 years with the city to see your program through. The third thing is the coordination with the other aldermen. And there we work very hard at that. We have a strategic breakfast every other month where we're looking at who's likely to come in. One of the problems of the system is everything is subject to election. You might not be elected as Lord Mayor. And it really does happen. So not often, but it does. So there's a bit of tentativeness about it. But then you're also working on the same breakfast with the previous Lord Mayor. So everybody's trying to see their program through. So in one sense, I've just got the limelight for 12 months. I've got the keys to the house. I've got the keys to the taxis and the Rolls Royces, and I've got the honor guard. So I can use that to promote my stuff for the year. But it's incumbent on me to make it work out. A couple of other points I'd make. One is that the electoral process here is one where you are not bringing in a party, which is where I think some of this. So you are being elected to a role for a specific period of a year. And I, over time, have begun to think this is really good. It means I try and get my stuff done. I'm not actually thinking about re-election. Why? Because there is none. So I'm not sitting there saying, is what I'm doing pleasing to you if it's uncomfortable because I need your vote? I'm saying what I'm doing is what I think is the right thing to do. And if I really, really muck it up, I can only do so at max for 12 months. So there's a lot in it. So I'm not bringing in 70 of my mates to do the job. It's just there, and I have the controls. And I guess the final thing I point out is, when you are 1,400 years old, we do take a very long-term view. I give you a great example on climate change. The City of London passed the very first Clean Air Act in the world in 1953. Right? We were at Rio. We've been at every single COP. We created the carbon markets. This year, I've brought out something called City Carbon Credit Cancellation Service. We're working, as I mentioned earlier, on the hydrogen markets, and we've been working on these for a long time. So, a lot of listeners will say, "Well, I know that the government just passed a recent this or that, or issued a paper or something." That's nice, but I would point you to many, many papers of ours going back decades on all of these subjects where we're really trying to take the long-term view. So the idea that a Lord Mayor has got this great 12-month refresh, in a sense, the way I think for people to look at it is, we as a cooperative are working very hard on what's our long-term view, how are we going to string it out. But every single year, starting with the wonderful Lord Mayor show, we have a brilliant and fresh marketing campaign.
That's a really great answer. And I think the interesting thing is, for a lot of people, probably in the UK as much as anything else, they look at not least the Lord Mayor show and the kind of the pomp and circumstance side of what you do, rather than the actual material underpinnings that really make a difference. And so that's hugely helpful, because you're shedding light on stuff that I think it is very, very important that people understand that is what the city does, and the kind of power that it brings, not just in the UK, but globally. It's terrific. On the power thing, though, what kind of relationship do you have? I mean, clearly there is Sadiq Khan is the elected mayor of London, and obviously not just the city, but the whole of London. And there's sort of wider politics who look at London as the sort of epicenter of central gravity of the UK in all sorts of ways, much to the frustration of anybody that's not in the southeast, I think. But what's your relationship like, and how does that work in practice?
Mm-hmm. Well, the relationship with the Greater London Authority, the GLA, and Sadiq Khan is very, very good. In fact, Sadiq and I were over together at the Olympics last month, and he made quite a joke in one of his speeches of, "Hey, Michael, I'm here, you're here. Who the heck's running London?" So it's a very friendly relationship, and we work very well with them. That said, no relationship of that intensity is going to be all smelling of roses. And you've got to look, therefore, at the differentials in the power. So, for example, we in the city have our own police force. We manage the bridges. We do that. Probably our biggest area of frictions are, oddly, not on policing, where Sadiq, of course, is responsible for liaison with the Met, not us. It's probably more on transport and transport for London, where we have things we would like to do, and TfL has got red routes, and of course it runs the tube. So we've got responsibilities for air quality. So there are a lot of areas where there could be snags, but by and large it works well. Sadiq's powers are different than mine. In theory, my powers are quite wide-ranging, but on that tiny, tiny little 1.12 square miles, Sadiq's powers are much broader in terms of geographic area, but much more restricted by central government. Would you make it that way? I doubt it. In the 1700s, the offer was on the table for the city to expand with the growth of London. The aldermen at that time decided to restrict themselves effectively to the old Roman walls. I'm not 100% sure why, but it probably would have brought them into greater conflict with the crown. What you tend to find in highly centralized nations is that the concept of a mayor in a capital city is a very problematic one, when just down the road is the National Assembly of whatever form. So there are a lot of tensions there. I think the British view of this is one of, we do tend to respect tradition, and we've let this go on for a while, and it's working well. It's certainly working well in economic terms. If it's not broke, why try and fix it? But there will always be some tensions there. But personally, I'm very happy to work with the GLA. I've enjoyed working with Sadiq Khan. I know we worked very well together because we all actually want the best for London.
I bet it's fun on the international circuit, though, isn't it? Trying to explain who does what and which mayor's which, and it's got to be a challenge.
There's probably a story I shouldn't share, but I will just for fun. my son and my two grandsons and a daughter-in-law live in Japan. And after I took office in November, my son's colleagues at work brought him to the canteen and said, "Hey, Nicholas, Nikos, do you do you like curry?" Because, well, yes, I do like curry. It reminds me of home. My dad loves curry. Well, we know your dad loves curry. And yeah, my wife and I we cook a lot of curry dishes because it's just something I really like. Well, we couldn't help but notice you're a little bit lighter skinned than your father. And then at this point, Nicholas wakes up and goes, no, you don't understand. My dad is not Sadiq Khan.
Brilliant.
But in truth, because of the way the city has worked over the years, I do represent the business, professional, and financial services of the UK globally. And I do travel with, the Lord Mayor travels at ministerial rank and has the use of some of the Department for Business and Trade facilities, some of the FCDO facilities and resources and support. And those relationships are very important. We do get really good support from central government on those trips. And I think this is where London does punch quite well, because I can go and represent business and all that. But if somebody wants to understand how Greater London works as a transportation thing or something, I go, oh, wait, out of my bailiwick here, you need to talk to the GLA who know that. And if you look globally, as I do, at other cities, you'll see that this two-part element gives us a lot more clout. So if you go to New York, the mayor there is very focused on New York, very focused on re-election, very focused on what New York is doing. And the idea of actually going out and promoting New York is a sort of I don't have time for that, because there's just so much that you can do. So the dual role works very well.
Yeah, again, fascinating answer. Really, and I didn't know all of that. I'm learning an awful lot today. This is great. Before we move on a bit, though, I couldn't have a conversation with you, given our mutual Christ Hospital School connection, me as an old boy there, and you obviously as a long-standing almoner for a long period of time. And for those that don't know, I mean, Christ Hospital has a very, very strong connection with the city, having been founded there back in 1552. And now down at Horsham, and for as long as I can remember, and I mean a long, long time, you probably know the answer to this, the Lord Mayor has been going down for speech day every summer. And that must have been an incredible day for you this year, wasn't it? To go there and be the taking the parade for for the march past and everything that went on with that.
Well, I can hear I'm not the only person who knows their history. Yes, 1552 and King Edward VI, etc. Yeah, I'm very proud of Christ Hospital. I must say I didn't really know it. I became involved after there had been a huge hit to the endowment. So I was sort of, somebody said, Michael, you're good at this, and a couple other people. Did you guys go down and work hard to sort Christ Hospital out? For your listeners, it's about 880 students, and just it's an independent private boarding school, so everybody's already turned off. I say, wait a minute. Christ Hospital is 3% of the total bursaries of all 1,300 independent schools. 20% of the students from overseas are paying full fees, which are benchmarked off of Winchester, Harrow, and Eton. And 80% of the students are on some type of support. 50% of the students are supported to the tune of 50%, and 20% of the students are completely under bursary. So it's a wonderful school, excellent results, great community, and just a really wonderful place to have some responsibility for. I stepped down as an almoner a few years back, but I must say I was really quite tearful this year returning. And I think there were two things that made me tearful. One is my father had passed away, and I was reciting lines that he had told me as my advice to the graduates at speech day. And that made me a little bit weak in the throat. And the second thing is that this year, in line very much with the science, engineering, and technology, Christ Hospital is the home to the Royal Mathematical School, which was founded by Christopher Wren and others, I believe Isaac Newton as well, to promote mathematics. And I have created the Lord Mayor's 350th Royal Mathematical School bursary, where we're trying to raise money to help Christ Hospital students study mathematics. We've raised nearly 600,000 in the last 10 months. I'm quite proud. But if any of your listeners want to help us put it over the line, I did sort of set a benchmark of possibly we might get 1 million in this year. If you believe in the power of mathematics, whether you're coming at it from a quantitative analyst side, an engineering side, a science side, or just because you believe in the power of it, we'd really like to get that bursary up there to help students through.
Fantastic. Thank you. I mean, it is an amazing place. I can only echo everything you said. I mean, having been a boy there from the age of 11 to 18, and my dad died when I was very young. I was very typical at that stage of the kind of pupils that were there, where most, an awful lot of us were single parent families, mostly from not from divorce, some from divorce, but more from where one or other parent had died. And it's a completely life-changing place. I mean, without a doubt, it's a cliche to say things change lives, but I mean, in my case, without a shadow of a doubt, everything I achieved in my career, literally everything I achieved in my career, I can lay at CH's door. I think I would have gone down a completely different path if I'd not been there. So I totally echo everything you say, and I can imagine that would have been an emotional moment. And I'm obviously sorry about your dad as well. Let's say that must have made it a challenging trigger time for you to do that. Moving on a bit to you personally and leadership style stuff, which I talk about a lot on these podcasts, and leadership experiences. I mean, you have had, when you look at your CV, an incredible variety of executive, non-executive roles. You've spanned a plethora of industries and sectors, as you alluded to right at the front end. I'm really interested then in your kind of changes to your own leadership style, conscious or unconscious, as you've navigated that line so successfully over the years. And first question is, I suppose, how conscious have you been about your own style? And related to that, which of those kind of roles do you find most rewarding, and which of them do you find most challenging? How does that all sit with you?
Well, it's a very rich topic, or you wouldn't have so many podcasts. um, where do I start? I think the first thing is self-awareness. If you're not aware of what your strengths and weaknesses are, you're hardly going to do the best job of applying yourself where you're going to make a difference or not. And that, I think, comes through in areas where I have probably been most frustrated, have been what I call kind of hold the fort type posts. I'm not good at that. And there are a lot of organizations that do need to hold the fort. That's not necessarily a bad thing. If you want enduring institutions, et cetera. I think the second thing is I like to see how whatever I'm doing and what the organization is doing is contributing to solving problems. And that goes back to my early bit about my motivations in the first place. And if I can't make that connection, I get frustrated and I become ineffective. So I think it's important to look. I'm typically looking at organizations that are out to solve a problem. That's what I particularly like to do. And many of the organizations I've created have been because I've seen a problem that needs a solution, and I need an organization to tackle it. So that's led to a number of charitable startups or some of my larger projects like the London Accord. So that's where I start first off. I think the second thing is the exec, non-exec line. You've got to know what your bandwidth is as an exec, and I'm not good at that. I probably take on way too much. That's another good thing about the Lord Mayoralty only being 1 year is you'll have to step down and quit a lot of these things. But learning to say no is probably the hardest thing for somebody like me. That's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It's just you need to know your own bandwidth, and you can only do so much exec stuff. When it comes to non-exec, in a sense, it's better and it's worse. It's better in the sense that you've taken on a role that you really just need to say, hey, I'm only being paid for a small amount of time or not being paid at all, which is most of the cases of trusteeships and almoners and all that. So I will have to limit this. That causes problems, though. When an organization hits a crisis, the non-execs have to be there. There's no finance director, there's no CEO, because the two of them fell out and there's some big HR dispute. Neither of them are working, but the organization needs to move on. And when that all finishes, nobody comes back and says to the non-exec, boy, you dropped your tools and devoted 70 or 80 days to this organization. Here's your back pay. That never happens, believe me. So you've got to factor that in before you take things on. I think the third thing is on the exec, non-exec line, that's the hardest thing to learn. And it's one I'd like to think I'm good at, but I might not be. And it would be hard for somebody to tell me. But always, always, always remember that the exec is the person you need to go through. So if I ever chat to anybody inside the organization, I always let the executive know, if possible in advance, but definitely afterwards. Hi, I chatted to the head of marketing and I made this suggestion or whatever. And I try and put that into a short email so that I'm not really subverting kind of the chain of command, which is horrifically dangerous. And if you have criticisms to make, and that can be hard when you're opinionated, like I am, try and make them in private to the chief executive or the chairman if you're not the chairman, before you do anything, to make sure you really got a grip on it. So that exec non-exec line is a really crucial one to understand. And I don't think, certainly sitting on the board, a lot of non-execs don't get that. They think their job is to move in, et cetera. I think another thing about and this goes back to your bit earlier about saying thank you and celebrating, Bob. A lot of non-execs, sorry, feel it's their job to tear everything to pieces. Well, I'm sorry. There's a financial system. It probably adds things up accurately. A couple of quick checks are worth doing. A couple of sensible questions. But there can be a tendency to really go into the rearview mirror and not look forward and spend all of your time. So one of the things I've tried to do on virtually all the boards I've been on, and probably with success in 3/4, is that the financial numbers come at the end. So we're not looking in the rearview mirror. We talk about, how's the strategy going? What are our risk factors happening? What's the operational reports? How do the customers feel? How do the staff feel? How do the wider stakeholders feel? Oh, and by the way, here are the financials.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Now, you can't always do that. There can be a finance, but and I think structuring the board meeting itself in the order of priorities tells everybody what your priorities are. So are your priorities really meeting the strategy? Are they really pleasing the customers? Are they really making the staff happy? Because the order follows that. And I would urge your readers to have a good look at their standing agenda and figure out where finance sits. And I would say most of the time, sadly, it's way too high on the list. That's the scorecard. But what we really want to know is what's the organization doing? I guess when it comes into roles that I find the most rewarding are ones where actually you've made a difference. And then this is going to sound really, really weird. You know when to leave.
Yep. Yeah. No, that doesn't sound weird at all. I get that. That makes sense.
If you've done your bit, and about 80% of what you could contribute, you've contributed, and that's fine. It's never 100%, and make sure you get out there and wind up and hold off.
Yeah, interestingly, specifically on the non-exec thing, I remember, looking at it through my kind of ex-military lens as well, there was a while, or it was a while back, I suppose, when, it was viewed that non-exec roles with organizations where that was a great kind of, post public sector career kind of job to do because it wasn't that taxing, and particularly in the paid non-exec world, actually you were earning money for old rope, really. Where obviously the world has clearly changed quite significantly now with not least senior managers regime and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of accountability on non-execs that has clearly changed that dynamic very significantly. And as you say, not all of those roles are rewarded at all. Some are rewarded very well, some are not so much. How much of that have you seen in terms of the shift in emphasis around what's expected of a non-exec, specifically in accountability terms?
Well, I made a catty remark earlier that what is good? What has modern governance done that's so good? And I do sometimes worry. I refer to it, or people who know me will know, I call it the detritus, the huge numbers of forms I'm filling out every year. That what are my relations? Am I a fit and proper person? Have I had a court case? Where's my driver's license? Where's my bank account? This, in my opinion, has done virtually nothing at all except increase costs. I've yet to see any of these really result in any changes, or we've seen a stamping out. I think the second thing is we're in danger of creating a class of non-execs who are too professional. I happen to be very good at exams, as my CV shows. Set me down with an exam. So yes, I am a qualified accountant. Yes, I'm a qualified securities professional. Yes, I'm a qualified engineer. Yes, I'm a qualified, et cetera, et cetera. I've got a lot of qualifications. I'm ideal for a board who wants a qualified person. Does that make me the right person? If I'm running a new tech startup, Maybe it's a dropout who is good at programming. Maybe on the other hand, it's somebody who's just got a good nose for the consumer, who's good at marketing. I mean, these are skills. It doesn't all come down to qualifications. So a lot of this emphasis on paper might be driving out exactly the sorts of non-execs that we really need in some organizations. So I do worry about this so-called professionalization of it. And you saw this when the IOD wanted, charter directors. And I'm sure there's things that you can learn. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, studying is there, but if that becomes a requirement as opposed to desirable, then I do begin to worry. So finally, I guess when you look at the governance issue, one of the really interesting ones has been some of the arbitrariness of time. So you're getting in this notion now that 3 years is a good period for a non-exec, maybe with another 3-year renewal, which is like 6 years, and this is a good thing. Well, I disagree completely. I won't name names, but I am on the board as one of the senior Neds of an organization. I've been there nearly 2 decades. And people go, that's crazy. I go, yeah, but the product life cycle is I'm just now, about 3 years ago, starting to see products that began before I was even a non-exec finally come to market. So you're throwing out the training. What you do need is a mix. I mean, if you said the whole board was 20 years old, that'd be
Sure.
crazy. But you're that. And on the other hand, it may be that 2 years is absolutely sufficient in a fairly easy to understand organization. But I'm not sure that fixed time limits really help that. What we should be doing is asking the right question. And the right question is, do you still have something material to contribute? Not something to contribute. Everybody's got something to contribute. But if you actually got something material to contribute, that means that your continued presence as a non-exec is actually helping the organization move forward as opposed to some other non-exec.
Some great points. I mean, interestingly, again, when I was in that transition out of the Air Force into the private sector, I looked at the IOD and the chartered director route, and I had a coach at the time, and the coach looked at me, and I can still remember her saying it. She looked at me, you got a lot of badges already. Do you need that one? And it was a really big moment for me because it did make me think about, what actually is that going to add to me in terms of my genuine credibility, experience level, etc. And I think you make a great point. I mean, I'm a big believer in it should be best person for the job in all of these spaces. And we've gone too far down the road of being too picky about either qualifications or all sorts of other on the diversity targets thing, etc. It's important. It's obviously important to make sure we have an equal and diverse organization. And as you say, you're not got people there for too long, but some of the points you make, I think, are really valuable about, longevity brings its own thing, not least in terms of actual accountability and, recognizing the history, that you're not reinventing the wheel all the time, which, I mean, I've seen enough of that in my MOD time, that's for sure, where people move on every 3 years or so and suddenly, it's now a complete, let's start that again, which is incredibly frustrating, particularly for those who are potentially further down the system who watch that happen with immense frustration. I always like to talk about role models and influencers on this, Michael. I mean, you've had an amazing set of experiences along the way. Who are the people that have shaped your thinking and who you kind of really look at as significant role models and influences on what you've done?
Mm. Well, Isaiah Berlin refers, to foxes versus hedgehogs, or the hedgehog knows one thing and probably actually does have a single mentor. A fox, on the other hand, hops around. And I'm quite polymathic, quite diverse. So I have picked up many things from many people. I think if I was to look, though, at moral core, leaving parents to one side, it's probably oddly my scoutmaster, a wonderful chap by the name of Bill Burhow. He was a Marine who, when I was in my high school years, very influential on me. He'd actually landed at many of the South Pacific Islands during World War II.
Wow.
Had one lung shot out from under him, wound up finishing off at Iwo Jima. But it wasn't his history. It was the type of person he was. He was very self-disciplined, and he was always, very conscious that things had to be done right. And so he was a moral guide there. I think when it comes intellectually, I'm not sure that there is. I read a lot, and I'm a bit of a magpie that way. And so I could give you a huge long lists of books, many of which have opened my eyes, whether it's on risk or it's on mathematics or it's on physics or it's on social theory. I think if I had to pick, though, an intellectual leader for me, it was probably the most frustrating person I've ever had to work with, which was my thesis advisor at the London School of Economics, Ian Angel. Ian is a wonderful deconstructor. Every edifice that I ever constructed, he deconstructed. Um, and I think it was that constant challenge from Ian about lack of certainty. So I have a very happy relationship with doubt. I think it's Voltaire who said something along the lines of he said something like yes, doubt is an uncomfortable position, but certainty is absurd. And I really embrace doubt, or I try to, which is, of course, a scientific approach to life. It's also oddly quite a religious approach to life. I believe it's Kierkegaard who says, you can't have faith unless you're actually doubting. It's an important leap there to doubt, and from doubt, of course, comes tolerance. If you think about it,
Mm-hmm.
if I know what you're going to say and or know that I'm right, I don't need to listen to you. Why would I bother? It's only doubt that says maybe I'm not 100% right all the time. Yeah, I would never tell that to my wife or my children, but but it is a possibility. Let's get at that. And of course, if you can embrace that sort of sense of doubt, that helps you with curiosity, and that helps you both in your science, your management, uh, whatever faith you have in the world, but also in your tolerance for your fellow man. So I think those would probably be my two there. Moral backbone from Bill Burhow, and understanding the richness of doubt from Ian Angel.
Yeah, I have to say, anybody that's survived the Pacific Campaign in the Second World War and coming back, undying respect. I mean, that was some tough stuff that they went through out there. No, I mean, amazing examples. And on your doubt point, I mean, I think the other thing that I think is really important as a leader, and again, I talk about a lot to people, is making sure you walk into a room and you listen first and speak last, so you actually absorb the opinions you get from other people, and also you've got two ears and one mouth, and use them in proportion and in that order. Because I think it's one of the dangers of people who are over self-confident and particularly the more extrovert kind of leaders who will go in and be too vocal very early. Right, this is what we're going to do. This is the problem. What do you think? And of course, everyone just sits there and shuts up because they're not. They kind of go, "You don't want to hear what I want to think." And so, no, great points. Really, really interesting. If you went all the way back now to, and were able to go back to a school age Michael, with all that you've done, all the experience you've got, what advice would you be offering him now?
I'm not too sure that a school age Michael would listen to me, so I'm not too sure giving him advice would be of any use. Um, I think probably the biggest thing I would say to school age Michael is, what's the area you think that you are the most useless at, and what are you going to do about it? There are a lot of other things, say yes more often, try and experience everything that you possibly can, work harder and more diligently, study harder. These are all great ideas, but I would try not to advise him so much as direct him. And I would probably take that concept we had a second ago of doubt in mind. Where do you doubt yourself the most, and what are you going to do about it?
No, that's a great example. I love that. That's very helpful. Highs and lows is a sort of section of these with all my guests that I try and cover, because everyone's got highs and they've got lows. And when you look backwards now, is there anything you wish you'd done differently? And if so, why?
Yeah, I think there are quite a few things I wish I had done differently. One of them is that because I'm quite dilettantish, I often don't finish things off when I could. In fact, I mentioned my thesis, which would take too long to describe, but it actually was 14 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and my wife will tell you the strangest thing about Michael is if he starts something, he will finish it. It's not like he doesn't finish things; he just finishes them in his own time. And I would say, keep the decks clearer was probably one of them. And that, of course, is related possibly because we moved so much as children. I went to about 18 schools. Is possibly that you keep too many options open. You want to say, look, I'm never really going to do anything about that, so just stop it and go on. So I think going back to that earlier advice about knowing when to get out, probably the one, there was one particular organization in the late 90s where I really refused to leave. I took it as a kind of a badge of honor to stick in there when other people weren't. And I did see the organization through. Ultimately, I got axed, and that's okay. I look back on it and go, fair enough. But I never got thanked for all the stuff I did to hold it together when nobody else would bother. And I think all I was actually after was the thanks. It wasn't the money. Funnily enough, but I think it was about 8, 10 months after I had gone, the guy who took over actually came to see me and did thank me ultimately. And further, even thanked me with a check, quite a substantial one. I said, you know what, we owe you. And I thought that was very big of him because he had to go back to the board who really didn't like what I've been telling them and say that, well, actually, Michael was right. And we just have a moral obligation. So fair play to him.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's very fair play, isn't it?
Yeah, very fair play. So I think that was one. And I guess the other one was it was a scientific area where I got dug deeper and deeper into this area of medical science. And I began to realize that people were falsifying results. And I did call it some, there's no moral hazard, but I just feel what I probably should have done was been firmer and earlier. Well, it didn't drag on very long. It was sort of, should I have said it after 3 or 4 weeks, or should I have said it after 3 months? And it took me 3 months, and I sometimes regret not being a little bit more forceful.
Mm-hmm. No, so I think it's interesting, isn't it, when I look back across my own career at various different things, and I think I tend not to look back much. I tend to be very much a forward look. I have no regrets, and I carry on down a particular road. But yeah, it's those kind of things where, should I have made that decision earlier? Could I have done it? I mean, interestingly, again, it's one of the things I talk to people a lot about in leadership roles. There are very few leaders I've come across who wish they had delayed decisions on things. Most of the time, it's they wish they'd taken them earlier. And particularly when that involves people, in terms of feedback and negative feedback and letting people go and moving people around in the organization, etc., where often it's the easy thing to do is let stuff ride. And of course, the team see it, the team know. It calls into question your credibility if you're not careful, all those sorts of things. I think it's such a common thing that's there. What's your high point, Michael? What's the thing that's your sort of most important achievement for you to date? And I guess beyond that, what do you really want to be remembered for downstream?
Yeah, this is the old legacy issue. I'd rather not talk about legacy.
I stopped using the word legacy after because a number of people said, no, we're not going to talk about legacies. So
yeah, I kind of don't look at it that way. I kind of like to look at, did I have fun solving some problems? And that's kind of it. I'm pretty relaxed about that. So, we had the maps. I wrote a book, The Price of Fish. I'm very proud of that. Zien, which is just said entering its 30th year, has got a track record of finding problems and doing something about it. Policy performance bonds, carbon credit cancellation, the introduction of support vector machines into British commerce. We got a whole string of achievements that, make us happy. So it's there. And then, of course, you got the personal ones, whether it's being a father, possibly a good father, a sailor, a lot of things I like doing. So I think it's just looking back and saying, was Edith Piaf right? Do I really not regret anything? And I think she's got a good point. There's no point in regret. So be proud of the things that you've achieved. And I think I've got a variety and I enjoy them. And it kind of depends on the circumstances you're at. Are you trying to impress somebody in a business situation with your business achievements? Or you're trying to impress people socially with, the celebrities? Why is your achievement so important? What are you trying to do? And I think it really should just matter to you.
No, I agree with that.
Me, it's did I do the best I could do with the skills that I had to address an interesting problem and maybe make the world a slightly better place.
Fascinating. And yeah, makes an awful lot of sense. Is there a low point though? Is there a career low point that you'd look at and go, that was my kind of one thing?
Well, I think it was that one where it was going back to your bit about making decisions earlier. I've always enjoyed almost every work that when I was younger, I kept a list of all of the jobs I'd had, newspapers, being a janitor, being a research scientist, doing cotton candy at a fair, anything I thought I had done competently. I used to chef a lot, before that was trendy back in the 70s. So, I've kept all of those. I've just enjoyed doing all of them. So I'm not really upset about any of them.
Yeah, it's a great position to be in. I feel very much the same. I mean, having moved jobs every 2.5, 3 years through a nearly 35-year Air Force career, I honestly can hand on heart say I didn't have a single one of those jobs where I didn't enjoy it. There were clearly highs and lows. There were points in some of the jobs which were difficult, and and some of them were very difficult, not least losing people and that sort of thing. But actually, on balance, every single job was great, and that's a lovely position to be in. And I feel very sorry for those that who clearly have a very different outlook on life, because that's tough at that point. You live in a mad world at the moment. I mean, you're as I say, I'm very privileged that you're giving me a big chunk of your time to make this, and your year as Lord Mayor must feel like a whirlwind in terms of it just disappearing on you, but how do you do the work-life balance thing? What's your what is good for you in terms of de-stressing and relaxing?
Well, I've got kind of a different view. I mean, firstly, as Lord Mayor, you've got roughly 75 staff, about 25 catering, about 25 security managing the house, about 25 doing the program. We're in the August downtime, but come Sunday, I'll be ringing the bell at Lord's if we make it onto our fourth day against Sri Lanka. And then up to Cambridge to give some speeches at Jesus College on Sunday night. And it'll be full tilt again for another 2.5 months. I love it. I get up every morning and wow, what's the day hold? And I have this day sheet, which typically starts at 7:30 and goes through till about 11:30 at night. And it is just fantastic. You could not keep it up for more than a year. It would absolutely kill you. And this month I've done all the usual things you'd expect, having de-stressed for the last 2.5, 3 weeks, which is my fingers swollen up, my ankles did it. I had a bit of a hearing ring. I'm all getting myself back into shape for that last 2.5 months. So I am not a good role model on that. But I do have two perspectives on the work-life balance thing. The first is one of my out of offices replies is always kind of, I'm replying to you because I'm here with my work-life imbalance machine. And the modern world is one where the technology has made us imbalanced. We're constantly available, etc. But is that the right way to look at it? My father used to come home on the weekends on Friday and get really quite catty sometimes because the game was off. The game ended at 5:30 on a Friday and didn't start till 8:30 on a Monday. Now in the modern world, that's not a problem at all. You can keep working through the weekend if that's what keeps you going. So I think it just boils down to probably two things. The first is there a work-life imbalance? If you're doing what you really like to do and want to do, what's the problem? Well, you're too single-minded. Okay, so I need a portfolio of things that I like to do. So you've got a portfolio. What is that portfolio? I love sailing, and if somebody said to me, Michael, you could be good enough. I've done Europeans and things, never quite made the grade. You could be a professional sailor. I'd leap at it. and then I'd be completely imbalanced, wouldn't I? So is that a good thing or a bad thing? So I would question that. And I think the second thing is, well, it's you. It's all about time. Everything about life is about time. And I've always had sort of, three Latin phrases, being a faux classicist. One is very much sumus unus, we are all one. The second one is carpe diem, seize the day. And the third one is tempus fugit, time flies. So if you're doing what you like to do, stop whinging about it.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I think the only kind of counter I'd throw back at you on some leaders who love what they do work-wise in organizations, they also do need to think about their people because they're not all the same. And I think that there are occasional instances where I've worked for people as well who are clearly very, very driven, and there's nothing at all wrong with that, as you say, but it's then how you measure that. You measure yourself by all means, but do you expect exactly the same thing from all the people that work for you, because they clearly have different lives and different approaches and different challenges, and I do think some of the time that can be an issue, particularly in, as you say, in the modern world where you're never disconnected, and you can literally be, as I often do, sending emails at 11 o'clock at night, etc., which is fine. But if you're expecting answers at 11 o'clock at night, that's not a great thing, I think, some of the time.
Yeah, I think some of it is culturally. I mean, you're absolutely correct. And a good example is moving in, because effectively the culture of the City of London Corporation owes more to the civil service than it does to commercial, as you might expect. Now, in our firm, it's seen that you do your work when you feel like it. That's the end. And then you do not expect anybody at CN to operate out of hours, so to speak. So, 9 to 5 is, so if I've sent you something on Friday night and you haven't responded by Monday morning, so what? That's my problem, not yours.
Yeah.
If you haven't responded by Monday afternoon, and you're working, well, hang on a minute here, Bob, what are you going to do about it? So we're good at that. And so we dump emails and all that. And if you open your email, well, that's your own fault. What I've been experimenting with this year, and I wouldn't say it's been wholly great, has been, I noticed that causes some of the civil service culture a bit of stress. He sent an email on a Saturday. I should be doing something about this. Well, you shouldn't have looked. It's probably the first thing, but that's not their culture. And so I've tried this thing of scheduling emails to go out a bit later.
Yeah.
The problem there is, of course, then you wind up with sort of Monday morning 9:01. I got 10 emails from the guy. Are these also important? What's happening? So I'm still not too sure what the balance is, but I think you're absolutely correct. How you deal with it is one thing, but you do have to think about how the way your working methods might be affecting other people's expectations of what you expect, which would be very bad. And some of that, I think, is about developing a culture. And at the end, we have a very strong one of questioning, collegiality, all sorts of things. But we've been working at it for 30 years, so you'd expect us to.
Yeah, no, it's a great answer. And I think as long as you're managing the expectations downwards in an appropriate way, I think that's entirely logical. We talked a bit about this earlier on, but the going back to the city and the livery companies and the sort of aldermanic process and all the rest of it, I think you highlighted that the some of the work that, particularly in the charitable sector, and I know in education and things like that, the livery companies are very, very active. I just have a perception, and by all means shoot me down on this, that is really poorly understood, by an awful lot of people in the UK, never mind beyond the UK. And they see it as it's a boys' club, it's old fashioned, it's, guys having, fancy dinners in fancy places. And it's not, none of those really good works make it above the kind of attention threshold. I don't know if that's something that you agree with me on, but I mean, I'd be really interested in your take on, particularly if you do agree with me, is what's the city able to do and the livery companies are able to do to turn around and try and shift the dial on that? Because I mean, I'd hope that this kind of thing, obviously going to a wider listenership, would help with some of that. Because I have certainly seen it firsthand, not least when I was in the Air Force. The Mercer's company was affiliated to the squadron I commanded and did fantastic stuff with us and with the Navy and the Army as well, where they were very, very supportive financially. Christ Hospital, we've already talked about in terms of the relationship with the city and the amount of city links and bursary sponsorships and so on, and direct help then to children getting a different life and a fundamentally different life in many instances as a result of that kind of intervention. But I just think it's not seen enough, and I just wonder if there's more that should be done.
Well, it's a very rich question, and to answer it, I think you do have to admit that there are a few problems. To be fair, I think the first thing to realize is that livery has not always been perfect. There are many instances amongst the 111, and if you go back roughly, we had about 40 ancient livery predating royal charters and all of that. We had about 40 who came in on up through to the early Industrial Revolution. We had about another 35 or 40 since 1926, when the Master Mariners started the movement again. As I said earlier, about 50, just under 50,000 people in the movement, about 30,000 actual liverymen, and then you've got about another 20,000 freemen and things. So it's there. I think the first thing is, one, it's a small geographic area, and it's great to have nearly 10% of the workforce involved in it. So I think that's the first thing. Second thing is the figures are quite compelling. we began realizing we had a problem here, which was, if you think about it, if we had a major scandal, I don't want to presume what it could be, but it wouldn't be hard these days to have a scandal. And I say, well, Bob, you belong to the worshipful company of usurers, don't you? You're one of those livery people, aren't you? Yes, I am. You're full of that scandal. Well, Michael, that was not us. That was the bread makers, and the bread makers, they got up to no good, and the other 110 of us are okay. So you've got a joint reputational risk issue, whether you like it or not, no matter how independent they are.
Mm-hmm.
So we began 8 years ago something called the Pan Livery Group, and the Pan Livery Committee. I was part of it, and led by Charles Bowman, previous Lord Mayor, and also interestingly by Rob Abernathy and the Mercers. And they said, well, what are we going to do? So the first thing to do is to get some facts. And the facts are the livery give out just under £75 million a year, making it, I think, the third largest movement in the country if you combine them. Combined with the corporation's donations, which are about another 50 million plus, you're looking at 125 million. The corporation's third largest supporter of the arts in the nation, et cetera. So we give a lot of money. But you can give a lot of money because you're so wealthy, right? Well, okay, you should be giving more. We also, of course, have the donations of hours. That I think the numbers are low, but the numbers as they currently are say just under 150,000 hours of donated time every year as school governors and all sorts of things, again, from amongst those 50,000 people. So it's a good movement. Let's leave it at that. It hasn't always been good. I mentioned some of the early liveries, and they were often restrictive of trades, keeping out foreigners or whatever. And in fact, it was in the 1870s, the livery was seen to be kind of wining and dining itself off of the donated proceeds it had, which is, don't mind people wining and dining if they pay for it, but if they're doing it off of their foundation money, that's bad. And in fact, that led in 1878 to the formation of City and Guilds and Imperial College, which was when the corporation realized they really needed to do much more for engineering and manufacturing, et cetera. So there's a whole movement there where the livery had, let's be frank, gotten a little bit into laziness and a bit of corruption. I don't think that is the case today. And what we're trying to do is to make sure the livery is being communicated properly. Hence my emphasis on being a democratic workers and residents cooperative, where the workers also vote through the livery. That's a different franchise than actually working in the city. That's important. We have two franchises, the actual 650,000 workers plus the livery workforce of 50,000. So that's I think, important. The other thing that we're trying to do in Pan Livery is we're connecting the livery up. We've now got some nearly 20 Pan Livery things, including getting livery to sign for the Armed Forces Covenant, what we do on the Lord Mayor's Big Curry Lunch to raise money for the Army Benevolent Fund, the Navy, and the Air Force. We have work that we do jointly on apprenticeships. So there's a whole bunch of Pan Livery things there. And this year we've started something Proud to be a Freeman Day, where we're asking people during Common Hall, we have 3 Common Halls a year, to wear a pin or a tie and explain to people on the street how they can join a livery company, because they're not closed companies. There's this perception. As you can tell from my accent, I didn't exactly grow up in London. I'm not quite sure why the perception is the way that it is, but we are trying to change it. And there's a selfish element to it too, which is we'd like to increase the number of liverymen. And in fact, one of the things that I've been doing as I've been traveling around the world has been having livery coffee connectees, where what I do is I say, hi, I'm in Beijing, Tokyo, New York. Any liveryman can come and meet the Lord Mayor. This has been very well attended, actually. And my thought experiment is, why don't we have half a million liverymen 10 years from now? And people look at me, I go, hey, I'm a scientist. It's a thought experiment. But why not? It could be one of the greatest outreaches of soft power for Britain ever, which is to have 500,000 people really understanding the traditions, really pushing and promoting it. So I think there's a long way to go. We've started. We've got more to do. I think the livery is healthy, but could be much healthier. And whatever we do, I'm afraid the message will be a tough one to get out in the modern era.
That's a great answer. Thanks very much. And it's really helpful, because I totally agree. And I wish you luck with that, because I think there's so much good from what comes from it. It's a crying shame when it does get knocked back by the naysayers. I mean, but independent schools would be another one. You mentioned it earlier on with CH, where people get turned off immediately. I think it's a similar sort of thing, and that's definitely a challenge.
Well, if any of your listeners are interested in checking out on my website, where I've got www.connect, CONNECT, numeral 2, prosper.net, I have a section on there about how to join a ward club or a livery club. They're very open. In fact, I think it was George Monbiot writing in The Guardian about 20 years ago. And frankly, I quite like reading George Monbiot, but he had this attack on the city. And it gets to the very end of the article pointing out, you need to belong to this, you need to belong to that. And actually, to do all this, you'd need to be a livery person. And how do you get that? Don't even ask. And I was like, well, actually, George, you're wrong. You just have to ask. Virtually every livery is open if they've got spaces to taking people on. I would say out of the 111, easily 90 of them would bite your arm off and say, if you really want to be involved in commerce, community, and charity, welcome aboard.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I'll put those links in the podcast description as well, because that's great. Thanks, Michael. There's a couple of questions I always ask my guests at the end, and they're short ones. You'll be pleased to hear. The first is, what's the most memorable event of your career so far?
Well, that is easy. It's the Lord Mayor's show.
Yeah, I guess that would be an easy one for you.
It's too easy, that one. I will tell you, though, a funny story about it, which is I've been asked a few times, what's the best thing about being Lord Mayor? And I've gotten up there. The worst one I had was we were having a formal dinner and somebody asked me that. And I said, well, obviously the best day of my life was the Lord Mayor's show. And I looked and I saw my wife and I said, very quickly, with the exception, of course, of my marriage. And then I looked further down the table and there was one of my daughters and my eldest daughter's birth. And I looked down the other end of the table, there was the younger daughter and my younger daughter's birth. But without question, leaving those bits, the most memorable event of the career has definitely been the Lord Mayor's show.
Yeah, fantastic. Was there a particular highlight of the Lord Mayor's show in your year?
Well, I'm a piper, so we had more pipe bands than ever. We had more cities from abroad than ever. Like Lagos, for example, First International, we had 250 people come over from Zurich. So my whole Connect to Prosper theme was to try and really help that along. And then I had the most delightful little surprise. I had made a complaint that I was unable to get balloons. Now, I had seen the Macy's Day Parade over the years from time to time, and I wanted the Lord Mayor show to have some of those big balloons, Bullwinkle and Rocky and all of that. And I was really excited about it. And there are a whole bunch of logistical reasons why you can't really do that in London. And on the day, the Worshipful Company of Information Technologists created an augmented reality app, which you can see on the BBC thing, where they came up to me and they gave me an iPad, and I could hold the iPad, and over every single float appeared a balloon.
Brilliant. That's really cool. Fantastic. What great forethought to do that as well. Very last question. What's the most difficult question you've ever been asked?
Yeah, this is one of those ones, never think about elephants and kind of questions. I think if it's about the career, it's probably, why do you do what you do? And I honestly don't know the answer. And by the time I do, it'll probably be too late.
Yeah, although I think interesting, because when you were talking earlier on, you talked about you like solving problems, and that's your kind of primary focus, and it frustrates you when you can't do that. So I completely see why you do what you do. And on that note, you have been incredibly generous with your time in a very busy year for you, and I think it's been a really illuminating discussion on a whole range of issues. I'm immensely grateful to you, Michael. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Well, thank you, Bob. It's been kind of fun to muse on some of these thoughts, and I appreciate you putting together a really good set of questions.
Not at all. Thank you very much indeed. All the best.